I have about a monthly meeting with the Prime Minister, and I always go in with two agendas, at least mental agendas. One's the formal agenda of the things that we have formally agreed that I should be reporting on, and the other is my opportunistic agenda in the pocket, because sometimes the Prime Minister is flustered, he's got limited time, and the best thing I can do is tell him what he needs to know and get out of the office. Another time, he's in a reflective, discussive mode, and then you have your opportunity. One day, I was talking to him, and his adolescent children cropped up in conversation. And I should point out that in New Zealand, we have a high rate of adolescent morbidity, drugs, binge drinking, teenage suicide, teenage pregnancy, and it's been an increasingly conscious problem in the New Zealand psyche. And so the conversation gradually shifted to what are we going to do about it? It's an important issue. And the usual New Zealand way of dealing with anything is to set up a commission which has everybody on it and come up with some compromise in the middle which doesn't actually take the agenda anywhere further. And I said, why don't you let me handle it, Prime Minister? Let me have a crack. And so I took, and he said, okay, what are you going to do? I said, we're going to review the evidence. We're going to put all the evidence on the table. And so we set up I set up from my office a panel co-chaired by a very distinguished academic developmental psychologist. Started with 10 people on the panel, grew, I think, Alan, to about 30 people. Very multidisciplinary, from people who are in mainstream issues around adolescent development through to evolutionary biologists, developmental endocrinologists, a range of people. A report originally took 6 months, then it took 15, then 18 months, subjected to international peer review. And that report doesn't have any recommendations in it. It summarises the evidence. I said, here, Prime Minister, here's the evidence. And he said, and I said, we suggest that your policy people now look at the evidence and see what they might recommend. And the important point was I was not trying to steal the evidence space from the policy space from the policy maker. I think scientists too often in this story steal the space from the policy maker and then lose the respect of the policy maker because we clearly don't know as much about policy as the policy maker. The Prime Minister set up a committee of senior people across departments to look at what our report said. And they came up with a raft of recommendations. The Prime Minister then said to me, well, I'd like you to review those recommendations. And we said, well, some of them are good, some of them are rubbish, and there's one or two things that have been left out. He said, right, okay. Now, you've got to remember, this is in the middle of the GFC when we were in austerity mode. He then said, okay, we're going to announce the 22 things that you have recommended through this process of iteration between very informal advice and very formal advice as a package. And you're going to be on the platform with me at the press conference when I do it. So he announced them, and the most extraordinary thing in that announcement was he announced it saying, this is an important problem. We do not know which of these 22 measures, if any, will work, but we are also demanding that these be evaluated as they're implemented to see which ones we will sustain or not. Now, in my experience, I never hear politicians normally say, we're going to do something and not admit, and not claim it's going to solve the problem overnight. Now, we've progressed. There's now an agency of government, the CE's in the room, which is charged with evaluating these programs as they're being implemented. Not done particularly well in the way they were implemented, which made evaluation easy, but that we've learnt from that. But the point I want to make from this story of the mixture of informal and formal advice is, and I should say, just as another point, the amount of money allocated to these 22 programs was, in New Zealand terms, enormous, and they range from quite innovative things like electronic assessment of children for depression through to the more traditional modes of thinking about children with mental health problems. Could this have been done if you didn't have both the modes of informal advice and formal advice? It could not have happened. And I think what is important in this lesson is if formal advice is to be effective, it needs informal translators right at the centre of government who are part of the process on a continual basis, not just to see it starts, but to keep it going all the way along. I still have a role in keeping this project going. Now, that is effectively the story. The story tells me there's a real important place for informal advice, but much of that informal advice is what I'd call serendipitous. Most of I would say 90% of what I do in Wellington is nothing more than wandering the corridors of the Department of Cabinet. It is when the official comes up to me and says, I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of that. What do you think? Who should I turn to? It's nothing more than that. I don't know when I walk into the room whether I'm going to be asked about asbestos or about earthquake risk or about something else. Your job is at that level. And I think governments that do not have access at the centre to that informality of advice are weakened by it. Equally, however, if the other parts of the system don't realise that government departments need to link, academies need to link to this much better. And Anne, I think, gave a splendid story yesterday of where the linkages are not there or not as they should be, that the job becomes virtually impossible. And I think I could see echoes of that in some of my experiences. So I think, just leave with the counterfactual. Had a group of people who were interested in adolescent health said, we're going to write a report de novo, unrequested, what would have happened? Thanks.